All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We are super excited that you have chosen to come out this morning, not come out this morning, but join us this morning. There's a lot of things you all could be doing, but we appreciate you all coming on. A lot of familiar faces on here, a lot of new faces, and it's great to see everyone here. But we are all here today to learn more about how we can support and create safe spaces for all of our young people. So we are joined here today, we'll be led today by the Louisville Youth Group and M Joy. We are super excited that they are here today to lead us. And just some housekeeping things today. So just remember to please have your computer muted. If you are not speaking, there will be a lot of times, an opportunity to ask questions and to speak. But if you are not, please have your computer on mute. And feel free, to turn your camera on. There's a lot of people here to meet and to greet, and you may see some faces that you don't know and some new faces, and it's a good place to reach out and talk and to get to see people, especially because we're not able to be in person. And a few announcements. So a lot of you know that this is a part of BLOCS organization, and so we just lost our great friend, Miss Felicia. So now it's just TJ and I, on the team. And so we miss her very much, but yeah, she has been blessed with another opportunity. And so now it'll just be us two. And so, yes, so next month, February 2nd, we have another training that's based on structure and clear limits, which is a youth worker method, that just teaches you on how to create even more safe spaces when you create, guidelines and, structures for youth to follow. It creates patterns for them and they're able to, set expectations for them. And so that will be next month, February 2nd from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. So look out for that. And then February 17th, we have a data report for you all. So last year, we had you all to participate, many of you participate in what we call a listening campaign and focus groups to figure out what is it that the community wants from us, And so we operate based on what you all need and based on the gaps and everything that the community has. And so that will be February 17th, and you'll be also getting an email invite to that as well. Okay, so enough about me. We can go ahead and get started now. Thank you all so much for joining, and we will have Joy to take it on now. Thank you so much. Great to see you all. Oh, and one more thing, sorry. If you all could, in the chat, just put your name and the organization that you are with.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is M. Joy. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the program director at Louisville Youth Group. A little bit about me: I am a transplant to Louisville. I took a big leap last year in the middle of a pandemic and moved to Louisville. Got the job here at Louisville Youth Group, and I just celebrated my 1 year anniversary with OIG on the 11th of January. Still in the middle of a pandemic. um, my background is kind of all over the place, but I am very much a community servant. I have been right before I came to Louisville Youth Group, I spent 5 years in the field of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, specifically focusing on youth experience with those issues, leading and facilitating dating and sexual violence prevention classes, and working with our local human trafficking coalition to refocus or focus some of their attention on LGBTQIA plus folks who disproportionately experience human trafficking or who experience it in different ways. So I am kind of one of those go-to people for particularly queer and trans experience of assault and abuse and trafficking, which isn't fun necessarily. It's not fun work, but it is very important work. Prior to that role, I have done everything from working in recreation centers as a program leader and inclusion specialist for kids with various mental and physical disabilities. I have been a diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer and consultant, um, and have done many, 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 many workshops with youth around leadership development and social justice, as well as workshops with businesses and schools um, and youth serving adults on diversity, equity, inclusion things. So um, there's so much more I could say about my background, but really you all are here for the presentation today. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And as I start to share my screen, I see that many of you have already put your pronouns next to your name in your screen. So if everybody could put their pronouns, this is lesson number 1 of being an advocate for LGBTQIA plus folks. So if you click on the participants box at the bottom of your Zoom screen and open up the list of participants, go to your name and hover over your name with the cursor. You will see a button that says More. And then if you click that button, it gives you the option to rename yourself. So if everybody could just take a moment to rename yourself with your pronouns. So add your pronouns to your name. And for folks who may not know what pronouns are or might not remember your English lesson from middle or high school, pronouns are those descriptors that we use in place of somebody's name or gender. So we refer to folks as he or him, she, her, they, them, and so many other pronouns that we'll get to later. So for those of you who don't know what Louisville Youth Group is, we are one of the only youth agencies west of Lexington in Kentucky or in the Kentuckiana area that serves LGBTQIA plus youth, so queer and trans kids. We serve kids between the ages of 5 and 20 currently, but we are in progress of expanding our programming from ages 3 all the way up to 24. What you see on your screen is our vision and mission and our values as an organization. I'm not going to read through those for you, but this is a little snapshot of who we are as an organization. So today's workshop is Allies in Action. Ally is a verb, which means that you can't just sit around and call yourself an ally in any way, shape, or form. In fact, that's not a label that you can claim for yourself. Folks of the disadvantaged or marginalized or oppressed groups, they get to call you an ally if they think that your actions and behavior is worthy enough of that title. So hopefully by the end of today, if you feel like you might be an ally to the queer and trans community, I hope that we can give you some actions and behaviors and ways of doing things that will actually put that allyship into action. So our goal for today is to create brave and affirming environments for queer and trans youth. This is our big gay agenda. One thing you should know about me is that I like to have fun while talking about serious things. I feel I'm pretty witty and pretty and gay. And there will be some videos later on, but I like to embed little jokes here and there. So if my humor, if you find it offensive, please let me know, because I don't want to harm anyone or cause harm by my jokes. But there you go. Okay, so here's our big gay agenda. We're going to start off with some identity development. Move into social determinants of health and really like what does the landscape look like for queer and trans youth, and what are those outcomes that we see when it comes to those youth in interacting with this dumpster fire of a society. We're going to do a quick environmental assessment or think through how you all might do an environmental assessment of your organization or center or wherever you're coming from. And then we're going to move into that allyship, but really advocacy and celebrating euphoria, gender euphoria, sexual orientation euphoria, pride, and dignity. And then we'll leave time at the end for all your questions and answers. I'm definitely one of those people, though, that if you have a burning question, something you feel really, really important and you can't remember it, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it. I don't mind being interrupted because I'm here to fill your brains with some of my knowledge. So to get us started, I want to know who's in our community today. So in the chat box, you've already shared your name and the organization you work for, but I would love for you all to share one thing that you hope to learn today. Create psychological safety, how to be more supportive and promote safety, how to ensure our youth always feel important, accepted, and safe. Yep. Supporting youth in the midst of identity development, for sure. How to better communicate and serve those, oh, the chat's going too fast for me, who are questioning their sexual identity. Got it. Tips on infusing queerness in the workplace. I love it. I didn't catch your name, but I love it. I'm here for it. Step number 1, create a Spotify playlist of queer artists. Awesome. Okay, cool. Go ahead and keep dropping those things. There's a lot of folks here with us today. I'm going to move on forward for sake of time. So I believe very strongly in rooting us all in common language. Because as you'll notice as we go throughout this presentation, language is one of those things that evolves and changes over time. And so for many of us here in this space, full disclosure, I have a really cute baby face, but I'm actually turning 40 this year. So I have lived through the AIDS crisis in the 80s and have seen words and language and identity labels and things change significantly and rapidly over just the 40 years that I've been alive. So one caveat I want to put out at the beginning here is to know that language is always changing and evolving as we come to understand ourselves and understand our communities and our cultures. And as we see, especially with the rise of the internet and access to other global cultures, we see bits and pieces being taken and utilized and to help us with our full understanding of who we are. So, everything that we talk about today could completely be changed in another 20, 30 years. But to start with our basic foundational language today, these are the terms that I just want to share. Sex assigned at birth. So when babies are born, they're delivered and a doctor looks at their external genitalia and literally uses a measurement card to determine determine what to assign that child. If they have a penis of a certain size, they will be assigned male. If they have a vulva of a certain development, they will be assigned female. And if they happen to have both a penis and a vulva or what looks like ambiguous genitalia, that person might be assigned intersex. But the sex assigned at birth does not really determine anything and everything, because our biological sex is actually made up of more than just the parts on our bodies that when we are babies. There are internal reproductive organs and systems. There are hormones. There are hormone sensitivities. There's DNA. Most of us have been taught XX and XY chromosomes. However, some people have XXY chromosomes or XYY chromosomes, or a really cool thing, I'm a nerd, is mosaic chromosomes, which means that chromosomes throughout the body have different DNA structures. So some are XX and some are XY and so on and so forth. Um, Gender refers to the socially constructed characteristics of what it means to be male or female, a man or woman. This includes social norms, ways of dressing, the roles and work that we do, how we interact in relationships with each other and in mixed groups. And those gender constructs and roles and expectations shift from culture to culture, right? It is very much a cultural thing, a social construct. Gender identity is our own internal sense of how we feel about ourselves when it comes to being male, female, non binary, trans, other. Cisgender is a term you might have heard, and that refers to folks whose gender identity matches their assigned sex at birth. So if you were delivered, a doctor said, "Oh, this baby has a penis," and you feel like a man, then you would be cisgender. If you were a person who was born with a vulva and assigned female at birth, but you never really felt like a girl or a woman or anything like that, you might be transgender, you might be non-binary, but you wouldn't be cisgender. Gender expression is how you do or don't display your gender identity. So think about the ways you wear your hair, the clothes that you wear to express yourself in some way. I like to say, and I believe I'll be like vaguely quoting a queer theorist here, but everything is drag, right? We have work drag, we have home drag. Like when we go out in public, what costume are we putting on, right? When we go to a work meeting, what costume are we putting on? How are we expressing our gender in that way, in that moment, at that time? And how does that shift and change from place to place and person to person? So gender expression is a combination of those things. And then the last thing is romantic and sexual orientation. So this is not to be, oftentimes people use the word preference. It is not a preference. Um, it is very much an orientation. So this is one's personal desire for emotional and sexual relationships with people. And that can look like a whole lot of different ways. Do we have any questions about this basic terminology before we move forward? Okay, cool. So moving into human growth and development. So I think a lot of us are working with young folks, and as we all know, kids take a long time to grow and develop. They aren't just born fully formed human beings. And unfortunately, puberty is one of those things that lasts for, gosh, so long. But I want to walk us through what gender identity and sexual orientation development specifically look like for everyone, not just queer folks. So gender identity is the first thing that develops as a person, and it develops in stages. So kids who are infants to toddlers, they become conscious of the physical differences between people, right? Because their parents and their teachers and their family members are showing them, teaching them their body parts, like your nose and your mouth and your eyes. And also, full disclosure, my partner is a preschool director. So I also have lots of knowledge and expertise about the littles. So those littles are becoming conscious of physical differences, and they're sponges. They're soaking up everything in the world around them. And so any meaning or value or roles or expectations that we as adults put on gender or body parts or things like that, all of that is being absorbed by their little brains. By age 3, most kids can easily label themselves as either a boy or a girl. Once again, that is a social or cultural construct. So if this young person lives in a culture where there are more than just two gender options, they might label themselves as something different. But most kids, especially in the United States, will either label themselves as boy or girl because those are the options, the only options that are given to them. Between the ages of 4 and 7, though, most children have a stable sense of their gender identity. So by age 7, most kids have figured out who they are and what their gender is, and whether or not that conforms or doesn't conform to the social expectations of their family, their school, etc. I can tell you from my personal experience as a gender non-binary person that when I was 4 or 5 years old, I was pushing back very hard against the feminine and the female and those kinds of constructs that my parent and family and stuff were putting on me. But I wasn't allowed to fully express myself in the way that I felt comfortable. So even though as a little I understood myself, because of the social pressure around me, I wasn't allowed to be who I was. And so I might have performed gender in a certain way as I was growing up for the sake of those people. But that I never felt 100% comfortable with that, right? So as you see below here, ages 8 through adulthood, people might continue to define or express themselves in a certain way until they have the language, experience, and safety to do so. So gender identity comes first. And like I said, those little babies, those kids, their brains are sponges and they're picking up things all the time. And so I really want us to think about how we as adults, as you're watching this video, I want you to think about how we as adults unconsciously put our gender biases on these little kids.
Look at this. Look at this. You like a dolly? Should we go for the dolly? There's a good girl. You're a good little girl, aren't you, Sophie? Look, what does this say? Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams. Ooh, look at this, Sophie. Meow, meow. I think she liked that pink dolly the best.
If I were to tell you actually that Sophie is Edward,
Well,
does that change anything?
I maybe thought, oh, this is a little girl, so I have to give her little girl things.
Say hello. Say hello. 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 Come on.
What's this one? Oh, what's that one do? Is that a robot? What about this? Oh, you like that one? What does this one do? Oliver.
You've gone for, you could say, boy toys for this boy.
Possibly in my subconscious, but for me, I was just going for what was around me, but in fact my subconscious was automatically playing a trick on me that I was...
If I tell you that he is actually a girl.
Really?
Yes.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. I suppose it's because of the stereotype.
And then that changed your behaviour
Yes,
towards
it
the
did.
child.
It did.
And your behaviour was
lie, yeah,
quite
it did.
directive.
1, 2, 3. Beep, 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 beep. Do you want to see my robot?
He's picked up the robot, the car, the puzzle game. I think she's been much more physical in handling the child than the other adults have been with girls.
That really astounded me because I thought that I was somebody that had a really open mind.
Surprise. So I automatically went for the pink fluffy toy because I said it was a girl, so I was sort of stereotyping.
I've always thought I was rather more open-minded than that, and I would think, these are children's toys, whatever the gender.
It will make me think the next time I'm with a child, so my niece or my nephew, to make sure that I am actually being sort of fair and equal with all of them, and just giving each child an opportunity to just be whoever they are.
Awesome. So really quickly, what were some of the takeaways? Feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat box. Did anybody have a moment where you're like, oh crap, I have littles in my life and I've totally done that?
I'll say, I think one of the things that I am connecting with is how young children are. And we often talk about how we can't have this conversation because the kids are too little. But the truth is it happens instantly. It happens before children are born, if we know the sex. So that just like drives home the point of that and how they're not too little and the conversation needs to get opened up early.
Yeah, Jessica, 100%, and also, Becky in the chat. Gender role and expectation stuff, it happens in the womb. It happens as soon as the gestational parent becomes pregnant. My partner and I are currently trying to make a baby, and as a non-binary gestational parent, I have been misgendered many, many times, going to the doctor's offices and things like that. And we are like being really conscious about saying, like, regardless of what the fetal sex may be, determined by an ultrasound, right? Nothing else. We are not we're not going to disclose that to any of our friends or family because we don't want this kid to grow up with that immediate expectation of gender. We want them to be free and liberated, right? And it really starts that early. Yes, let's end all gender reveal parties. Actually, Monica, just so you all know, I've been thinking about starting a side hustle where I claim to coordinate gender reveal parties, but then I come in with this PowerPoint and give people an educational lesson in gender. I don't know, maybe it would work. All right, moving right along. Sexual orientation and identity development. So this is something that starts to happen around the start of puberty, right? Which is different for each kid, but typically starts around age 11, 12, 13. And puberty lasts, yes, until you're about 20, 21 years old. So our bodies are constantly growing and changing, and our brains are growing and changing and developing. And we're getting all the big feels and the hormone rushes and all that kind of stuff. So, around middle school is when we start to see that romantic and sexual orientation emerging. And once again, if the young person's environment provides different orientation options and labels and embraces those and affirms those, young folks have an easier time understanding themselves in that social context. Whereas if that young person is only provided with you're either straight or gay, or even just you can only be straight if the culture or society is heteronormative, meaning forced straightness, or forced heterosexuality, then that young person is going to feel at odds with themselves. And another thing to note, especially for young folks, and adults is the difference between behavior and orientation, especially for young folks as their bodies are growing and changing and they're learning about themselves and the world around them and how they relate to other people. They might experiment. They might try things out sexually, even with their peers, classmates, whatever, because they're trying to understand themselves. That does not necessarily mean that they are a certain orientation. Really, only that person has the right to define that for themselves. So, one of the things that can be confusing for adults and service providers working with youth is that, one day a kid might come into your center and be talking about a relationship with one type of person, and then the next week they're talking about a relationship with a totally different kind of person. And so as the adult, we're like, what do you mean? How do you identify? And maybe that prior week the kid identified as straight, and the following week they identified as gay, and maybe the following week they identified as bisexual or pansexual. And as the adult, really our job is just to listen and help them understand themselves and not tell them that they have to be any certain kind of way. They have the right and the freedom to label themselves or use whatever labels or terminology or definitions that they feel fits them in that moment at that time as they're trying to understand themselves. And then
Wow, Pam.
when we think about our sexuality, right? This is a human experience across our entire lifespan. From birth until death, we experience, feelings of desire and romantic attraction and emotional attraction and that kind of stuff. Typically, in sex ed classes, when we were growing up, at least when I was growing up, it was very much abstinence only. And any mention of like sexuality was very much like a man and a woman fall in love and then they have sex, and if they don't use protection or if they aren't married, they'll get an STI and die. Um, and so we weren't really taught about holistic sexuality. We're taught to, especially by the media, to only be attracted to like certain body types. And once again, like just a little like precursor, that oftentimes what we find attractive or, what we find attractive or beautiful by our society is often a very narrow view. It's a very white, straight, very specific view of what is attractive and what isn't. And so what we need to start working towards is the idea of holistic sexuality, which we develop over the course of our lifetime. So the image that you see on the right of the screen are what we call the circles of sexuality. Also in a former job, I was a human sexuality educator, so just another note there. So what we see in the circles of sexuality is that it's not just our attraction or desire for certain body parts or certain types of sexual activity, but it's things like sensuality. What characteristics in somebody's face make us attracted to them? What characteristics in their personality are we attracted to? Do we like to flirt, or are we terrible at it? How does the media fit in with our sexuality or the sexualization of people? When we think about sexual health and reproduction, right? Like that's another facet of our sexuality. Not everybody has sex to make babies. A lot of people have sex because it feels good. What about intimacy, right? Relationships aren't just sexual. They can be intimate in ways that are very deep and knowing and emotional. And then our identity is a piece of that as well. And then our values, right? What are our values around our sexuality or all of these things? So it's way more holistic than anybody gives us credit for. So we need to start thinking of sexuality in those ways. And as a young person, if a young person comes to you who is in the middle of exploring their romantic and sexual attraction, these are the things that we should be kind of guiding them towards, like asking them about like, okay, well, why are you attracted to, what about that person do you really like? What are and helping them identify what their personal values are. Instead of saying, you can only be this way, these are the only body parts that you can be attracted to, and, so long. So a quick reflection. When did you first experience gender sanction? So I want us to think about those moments because it happens for all of us, whether you're queer or trans or cisgender or not, whatever you are, there is always a moment where we do something as we're exploring ourselves and relationships and that kind of stuff, where we do something and a friend or a family member or a teacher or a coach or a classmate or a youth worker tells us, you can't do that. That's for this gender and not that gender, right? When is that moment? When did you first experience some type of gender sanction? Feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. And maybe as you all are thinking, I can share my own experience. I remember being 4 years old and running outside to play with my friends without a shirt on. So 4 years old, as a child that was assigned female at birth and had not gone through puberty yet, so did not have breast buds or breasts, ran outside without a shirt on. I looked, except for my long hair, I looked pretty much like all the little boys that I was playing with. My mother came outside and saw me without a shirt on, yelled at me, demanded that I get back in the house and put a shirt on because I was a girl and girls can't go around without shirts on at 4 years old. And it made me feel ashamed. It made me feel scared. And obviously, I always wore shirts when I went outside to play after that. Do one or two other folks feel comfortable sharing? If you haven't already dropped something in the chat box. Yeah, girls and boys uniforms at Catholic school.
I think one thing that I went through when I was younger is my brothers were allowed to go out with their friends and go to the mall and stuff, but I was never allowed to go out because I was a girl and I couldn't go by myself.
Yeah.
Mine's kind of different. I'm the only girl and the youngest out of a bunch of male cousins. And so when I was younger, my mom had a big like water slip and slide, and everyone was in trunks. And I was maybe about 4, and of course I didn't have anything growing, and so I wanted to wear trunks like the boys. And so she let me wear the trunks, and I was running, sliding, and slipping with them, and they were just like, "Nope, she's a girl," and she's like, "She doesn't know yet. Let her do it." And it kind of like brought awareness to me, like I'm not like them, I'm different, because they made it a big issue. My mom didn't. So that was my first time really noticing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, clothing is one of those first ways of that we express our gender, or that our parents express gender for us, right?
I think weirdly enough, my mom never really put gender roles on us until very much later on in my teens. She was a tomboy and I'm the middle child of 2 brothers. And so the only time that I really kind of knew I was a girl was when I got my period. That was kind of the first time that like I was like, oh, I'm not like my brothers, or I'm not like them. And it took me a long time to kind of get comfortable in my, I guess you could say, like womanness or femaleness or whatever. But it was never really affirmed or talked about when I was a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, and those messages are strong, right? Especially if you are assigned female at birth, because of, once again, intersectionality, intersections of patriarchy and misogyny with gender stuff. It just, what little girls are taught to wear and to do and how to behave, like the constant messaging to make yourself smaller and don't open yourself up in certain ways, and you must be protected and all those kinds of things. Like, we that we get those very strong messages. But I also want to be very clear that boys and people who are assigned male at birth also receive very strong gender sanctions, especially around showing emotion, right? Like boys don't cry and that kind of stuff, or boys can't wear dresses, or boys can't play with dolls, those kinds of messages. It's not liberating at all. And then I want you to think about for a second as well, if you've ever had, especially as an adult, but if you've ever had a romantic or sexual partner that you wanted to keep a secret, and maybe we won't share this out loud with the group, but I just want you to think about it for a moment. Like, have you ever dated somebody who you were like, God, my parents would never approve of this person, or my friends will think I'm nuts or weird for dating this person, or like maybe in middle school or high school you had a crush on somebody who was like not popular or was kind of a nerd or something, and you like didn't want to reveal your crush because you didn't want to get made fun of. I want us to think about, like, why did you keep that a secret? What was the fear there? Because those types of common experiences are, it's something that we all experience as human beings at some point in our lives, but these kinds of experiences are amplified for LGBTQ folks. Yeah, thank you. I just want to say thank you to the men and male identified folks in the chat for sharing. Like, I know that it can be hard to open up and be vulnerable about this stuff because of society thinks. So thank you all for being vulnerable as you share in the chat. So the next part of this is coming out, which I think, most people are aware of as a concept. And so once again, bringing some levity to the situation, I present to you the coming out song.
Oh, hey, I am so glad that you are here. We actually have something that we need to talk about. Or maybe you should just listen.
We're all the same, we just want to belong. So let me explain in the form of a song what you're about to find out. Got news to share, so sit yourself down, get yourself prepared. And if this is hard to hear, then you should hit replay, 'cause I can guarantee it's harder for them to say. Whoever sent you this told me to say hello, give you a hug and kiss, and also wanted you to know they're gay. And today is a day that you're finding out because they're happy this way. Oh yay, yeah, because there's no reason love's always in season, and love is love. Love is love. Love is love. We're all the same, we just want to belong. So if you are ashamed of them, then move along, 'cause the world is changing for the better, you'll see. So embrace the grace of sexuality, 'cause everyone has a view, but there is not a cure. Don't say that they're confused, 'cause I'm gay myself and I'm very sure. If you were sent this song by someone you care about, then you should clap along, 'cause it's their way of coming out, they're gay. And today is a day that you're finding out because they're happy this way. Oh yay, yeah, because there's no reason love's always in season, and love is love. Love is love. Love is love. They could have robbed a bank or stolen a car, but all they've done is love who they are. And they want you to love them back. How could you be mad at that? They're allowed to be proud, so let them sing it aloud. They're gay, and today is a day that you're finding out because they're happy this way. Oh, yay, gay because there's no reason love's always in season, and love is love. Love is love. Love is love. Love is love. Life is better when you just remember
in there, give them like a big bear hug, be like, I love you. You're the best. And you're gay. It's good. Yes. You have an amazing day. All right. And, shoot. Gay. Am I right? I don't know. All right. I'm going to go. Goodbye. Goodbye. Okay.
So you're welcome. That little ditty will be in your head all day long. I don't know who the artist of the song is, but if you go to YouTube and type "Coming Out" the official song, you should be able to find this. All right, but for real, coming out is not easy. And also there's this concept that is that we also want to talk about, which is inviting in. So coming out typically means that there is a need to declare difference because we live in a heteronormative, cisgender focused society. Anybody that deviates from that has to somehow like declare it, because the assumption is that everybody's straight and everybody's cis and that's just the way things are. So if you're not those things, there is a burden being put on you to express your difference or keep it quiet for the sake of respectability. So coming out as a term or as a concept is really about that social need to declare difference. But what it really is, it's an invitation inward. It's a need to be fully known. So when I changed my name or started going by a different name, I chose a name that had significance to me in terms of it was something that was more of a name of affection. And so by changing my name to that affectionate term or name, I was inviting people in to who I was instead of blocking people out by, using a certain name with certain people and that kind of thing. So coming out and inviting in is an ongoing process. Every single day, once again, because of the heteronormativity and that kind of thing, every single situation that you can think of where you're talking about your life, your relationships, your attractions, your interests, like that kind of stuff, your identity is a part of that. And so it becomes really, really hard for folks, especially young folks, to feel safe enough to share who they really are and to invite people in, because the response to that sharing may or may not be positive. Because of the progress of the LGBTQ rights movement over the past 30, 40 years, we see kids coming out younger and younger. But it also depends upon whether they're living in a city or a rural area and what their family structure is like and what their schools are like and environments and that kind of stuff. So the experience may or may not be positive, and it may or may not be positive depending upon the people. Like maybe they have a really supportive family. That's the hope. That's the goal. But maybe their school is really unsupportive. And so it can cause a lot of trauma to not be accepted for who you are 100%, and to constantly have to navigate, is this a safe place for me? Is this a safe place to be me 100%? And we talk about coming out as an issue of safety. We know that young folks who come out or are forced out, outed by other people, experience child abuse or domestic violence in their home. Sometimes experience sexual assault as a quote unquote curative, which is not curative at all. Let's be clear. It is assault. And, they might experience bullying and harassment at school, be fired from the workplace, all kinds of things. So this is very much an issue of safety. Even just walking down the street, depending upon, where you're at in the world, walking down the street, holding the hand of your partner, if you are in a same gender relationship, can be very dangerous. And I myself have experienced hate crimes while walking down the street, just holding the hand of my partner. So we never want to out somebody. We never want to force somebody to come out when they're not ready. These are just some more statistics about coming out. So, things to note. Young folks who are out to their immediate families report feeling happier than those who are keeping it quiet and holding all of that in. We see other things like 9 in 10 youth say they're out to their close friends, and 64% say they're out to their classmates. 75% of youth say that most of their peers do not have a problem with their identity as being LGBTQ. My takeaway from this, especially in working with youth for decades, is that the kids are all right. It's the adults that need the help. We have a lot of unlearning to do as adults so that we can fully support and affirm these kiddos. Is somebody asking a question or just unmuted for a second? Okay. So I want us to think about what's in a name. Just once again, bringing this back to your personal experience and how it relates to being LGBTQIA+. So I want you to think about your name and letting people in. Do you go by your legal or government name or a nickname? And why? Why might you use a different name with different people or different institutions in your life? And how do you feel when people say or spell your name wrong, or when people call you by another name? Feel free to answer one or more of these questions in the chat box or unmute yourself.
So my name's Jessica, and there are a bazillion Jessicas born in the late 70s and early 80s. And I never really attached to my name at all. And I did AmeriCorps, and there was like 4 or 5 Jessicas. And so we all just went by our last names. And so there's big groups of people that just call me by my my last name. And I loved it. And I realized that I felt more like that than my given name. And if people, and Jennifer, I get called Jennifer, all Jessicas and Jennifers. Then there's like 10 bazillion of Jessicas and Jennifers. And I get called Jennifer all the time, and I just don't even correct people. I'm like, well, whatever, they're talking to me.
Yeah.
So I'll keep talking just to say that my partner and I are raising a non-binary child, and my partner's from a different country, and we gave our child a name that's a shortened version of the name, and it actually works out nicely because you can't tell female or male in the United States. But then I heard our child the other day say their name and then say it's Dutch for William, and that kind of I feel like that kind of broke my heart, because I was like, oh yeah, that and then I don't know. So it's starting a whole new conversation about what their name can be. And yeah, so anyways, I'm learning about name stuff too.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for sharing that.
For me, my name is Zion. For me, it's different as I've gotten used to it over the years. So I get called Zion, or Zion. I get called so many different versions of this name. So I've actually gotten used to it. And so as long as you're able to somewhat get it close, then that's okay with me.
Yeah, but how does it feel when somebody gets it right the first time?
It's a shocker. And actually, it makes me glad. So I don't have to kind of give them the spiel of, well, no, this is actually how you pronounce my name. So I'm actually glad when people do get it right the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what's happening in the chat. Thank you all for continuing to share. I personally because of our systems, because of our healthcare system and our legal system and that kind of stuff, because of the barriers to changing your name or, anything like that, I often use my legal name or my government name in those types of like systemic places. And then I use my chosen name, the name I gave myself, with the people that I want to know me, right? And so what's also interesting is that over the years, I used to go by my given or legal name. And so I can tell who in my life knew me from before and who in my life is like who I've let in, right? Depending upon what name they use when they address me. Um, yeah, cool. Well, I just want to, I wanted to do that quick reflection because I think oftentimes when we talk about accepting and affirming and advocating for queer and trans folks, using the proper name, like using the name that they give you and they want you to use and using the pronouns that they want you to use is literally, it's like it takes the littlest effort and it means so, so much. It means so, so much. So, really quickly, coming back to that point on pronouns, pronouns are used in some languages to identify or refer to a person or their belongings. In English, especially American English, we typically use the pronouns he, him, his, and she, her, hers, as well as they, them, their. Um, they, them, their, while some folks might like to argue that that is not a proper usage of a plural pronoun, you can cite the dictionary that the singular usage and singular unknown usage of they, them, their goes back to the 1300s. So imagine for a moment that a child leaves a backpack sitting in the hallway of your center or office, and that child disappears and all you see is a backpack. The questions you're going to ask out loud to other people is, whose backpack is this? Why did they leave it here? Right? We already use they and them all the time as a singular, specifically a singular unknown, not just as a plural pronoun. And so what I want you to think about as somebody who uses they, them pronouns, I want you to think about the fact that my gender is unknown to you, right? So I use they, them pronouns because my gender shifts and changes, and my expression of my gender shifts and changes. And as a non binary person, my gender is unknown. It is not this or that, it's something outside of that. And so when somebody uses they, them pronouns, like try to conceptualize it in that way, right? They are one person, they are not plural, but their identity has a plurality to it, right? I am all things and everything and neither this nor that all at once. I am a they, them. But once again, language is always evolving, and now we have even more pronoun options. So you can see some of those, what we call neo-pronouns or new pronouns, and also a concept called noun self, which is where folks will use a noun such as bug or tree or rock or something instead of pronouns. And then some folks just use their name only because it just eliminates that whole gender business. The neo-pronouns can be difficult to learn, depending upon, your brain. But it's really, really, really important that if somebody gives you a certain set of pronouns to use for them, that you make sure that you use them. If you mess up, it's okay. Give yourself some grace. Do not make it about you though, and apologize profusely. Apologize, say it to yourself the correct way, say it out loud the correct way, correct yourself, and move on. Queer and trans folks do a lot of labor for folks who are getting it wrong. And it should not be on us to hold people accountable and correct people all the time. Oh no! Reload. What's happening? Okay, give me just a second. Okay, here we go. That's not reloading. Okay. So I want us to practice pronouns. I think oftentimes, in these types of workshops, we give a brief overview of what pronouns are and expect you to use them properly, but there's no real practice to be done. So what I would like us to do is to break out into the breakout groups and actually do some pronoun practice. So on the screen, what you see here, is a conversation, basically. Hi, my name is M. I use they, them pronouns. How about you? The takeaway from this is M uses they, them pronouns. When I'm telling you about myself, you're taking in that information, right, and translating it. So I love to sing karaoke, or I love to sing, especially karaoke. So if you were talking to someone about me, you would say, they love to sing. I want to see them do karaoke. And trust me, you want to see me do karaoke. When I go on hikes, I like to forage for mushrooms. You're thinking to yourself, I want to forage mushrooms with them. That's so cool. I have 4 cats that are really cute and sometimes a pain in my butt. And you're thinking to yourself, their cats are really cute. I've seen photos and I want to pet them. Unless, of course, you have a cat allergy, and then I'll just enjoy their photos. All right, does that make sense? So we're going to do this in the breakout rooms. We'll give you about, let's say, 5 minutes. Antonio, if you can put people in breakout rooms, what I want you to do in that room is to introduce yourself, but I want you to introduce yourself using they, them pronouns, or use different pronouns that you don't typically use for yourself. So if you typically identify with she, her pronouns, or use the she, her pronouns, or if you typically use he, him pronouns, try switching pronouns to either they, them, or the other ones. And then I want you to go around in that breakout room. So introduce yourself, give a couple facts about things you like to do or things you have. And then the person next to you gets to introduce you, saying, this is so-and-so. They like this. I've seen their backpack somewhere, right? And then you introduce yourself and so on and so forth. Any questions?
How do I get to that breakout? Okay, I got it.
There you go. Antonio, do I need to join a breakout room, or do I just
You don't have to unless you want to.
Okay.
All the rooms are pretty balanced.
Okay, cool. All right, and then we have like a 5-minute timer, or do we have a?
I got the time, and I'll broadcast it to
Okay.
the rooms. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
No problem.
Back and rejoining us. Oop. As folks are coming back and rejoining us, feel free to drop in the chat box how that felt. What did it feel to use? How did it feel to use pronouns that are different than what you're used to for yourself, like when other people were referring to you? And how do you feel like you did when using they, them pronouns? Also, on your screen, as you're putting those reflections in, I went back to the Let's Practice Pronouns page. There was a QR code and that is not loading. So I'm not sure, maybe when we share this presentation at the end, you'll get it. But until then, there is a link here on the screen, pronouns.-18.org.au. And this is actually a site that you can go to and practice using different pronouns for folks. So if you have people in your life, or if you feel like you should practice more, and you should, you can use this website as a way. They have a fun little game that you can use to practice your pronouns. And I will type this into the chat box.
Oh, good.
You're welcome. So another pro tip from me to you, especially when it comes to pronoun stuff, is that it's better to use a gender neutral or gender expansive pronoun like they, them, than to completely misgender somebody by using he, him, or she, her for somebody when you don't actually know what their gender is. So until you know what somebody's pronouns are, I like to just get into the habit of using they, them pronouns for everyone. And then if I ask somebody their pronouns and they tell me something different, then I start to use that. That way you're not immediately starting, you're starting to break down that unconscious bias, and you're immediately like reframing and starting to reutilize or utilize new skills around that pronoun usage. All right. So the next part of this is really looking at intersections of health and identity. So, I think I have a lot of slides with statistics and things on here, and I think I might go through them fairly quickly just so we can get to some other stuff. But if you need me to slow down, please let me know. And I think, for most of us who work with youth, who work in social justice fields and organizations or public service and that kind of stuff, I feel like a lot of us are probably really familiar with social determinants of health. And basically disproportionate health outcomes for marginalized or oppressed populations. So when we think about social determinants of health, what we're looking at are what are those social structures that cause health disparities, right? If everything were equitable and everything were inclusive and everything, if oppression didn't exist, right? Like we could all live really happier, healthier, liberated lives. But unfortunately, we don't live in that kind of space. So we have to examine these determinants of health, and these are the different areas where we need to be focusing our efforts to make things more equitable and inclusive and affirming, and not just for LGBTQ folks, but for folks of all marginalized groups, right? For Black and Brown folks, for our immigrants, for people with disabilities, all kinds of people, right? So I want us to think about how do these social determinants apply specifically to queer and trans folk, especially youth. When we look at healthcare and access to healthcare, this is one of those key places where LGBTQIA plus folks experience a lot of harm. Everything from being misgendered because your health insurance has to match your ID, which has to go by your government name instead of the name that you choose for yourself. A lot of doctors' offices misgender their patients and only go by the legal name that's given to them, and not the name that the people actually use it with them or ask for them to use. And then just thinking about like doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals who are completely uneducated about how to effectively and serve LGBTQ folks. I can tell you when I was 18 and going to a gynecologist for the first time and being investigated, what's the word? I had this nurse who was asking me about, my sexual practices and whether or not I was using a form of birth control and that kind of stuff. And like the look on her face when I told her that I was sexually active and not using any form of birth control was like a look of like shock and awe and dismay. And then I told her that I was gay. And, then she launched into the whole AIDS thing. And so like there I was, 18 years old. This was my first doctor's appointment that I had made for myself, by myself, and was going to without a parent there. And through this line of medical questioning, I had to come out. And then I faced this really gross like logic from the doctor who said that because I was gay, I was going to get AIDS, which I just want you all to know that the rate of transmission of HIV in the lesbian population is like astronomically low. Like the chance of getting AIDS just through basic sexual contact for women loving women or people with vulvas is really low because the types of sexual acts are less risky than other sexual acts. Pro tip from me to you, right? But these are the kinds of things that queer and trans people face when going to the doctor, right? It's like our partners can't come into the room because they're seen as our friend or our roommate. Had that issue recently. We're misgendered. People make assumptions, all kinds of stuff. And that's not just something that happens in the healthcare industry and community. Like that happens in our schools, that happens in our churches, that happens in other neighborhood institutions, banks, right? All that kind of stuff. So what we see is a lot of disproportionate negative health outcomes. A lot of queer and trans folks are afraid to go to the doctor or will not seek medical treatment because they just don't want to deal. And they're afraid of having to deal with or are actively being abused by these systems. And I want us to think about how these social determinants compound when those queer and trans folks are also people of color, when they're Black, when they're Latinx, when they're Indigenous, when they're Asian, right? How does this compound if they're a person of color who also has a disability, if they're deaf or use a wheelchair or something like that, right? How does this compound if they're also an immigrant? How does this compound if they are currently houseless, right? So these are the things that, like when you are interacting with queer and trans folks, we have to take into consideration, like this one-on-one interaction is not the only thing that's going on in people's lives. There's a whole lot of reasons why folks don't come out or, don't go to the doctor or feel unsafe in their communities or even in their homes. I'm going to skip over this intersectionality slide just a little bit, but I do just want to note that it's really, really important for us to understand that, oftentimes LGBTQIA plus issues and people and movements are thought of to be as a white thing. And it's not. There are many people of color who identify in this way, but might not use this language, might not use the LGBTQIA plus alphabet soup terminology. So it's important to ask folks, first of all, not to assume, but also to ask folks, like, what language or what label or what identity do you use for yourself? Like, what feels good for you? Especially because oftentimes people of color, folks in the Black community, will not use the term gay or queer because of the negative social connotations and harm that has come from using those things, right? Or the perceptions that come along with that being a white term. So thinking about women loving women or men loving men, those are alternates that folks might use. And I'm sure there's other language and terminology out there that I have not even touched on yet. This is just the spiral model of power and harm. This was something that myself and a colleague came up with back when I was doing domestic violence and assault work. And I feel like it's really helpful for illustrating how how our interactions in different social situations might be contaminated with harm and abuse, right? So at the center, we see that individual one-on-one with myself and my partner, and then myself and my family, my friends, my school or work, the community organizations, the LGBTQ community, the broader community, social systems of government. And what we see running throughout all of this are different forms of social abuse, mental abuse, verbal abuse, economic abuse, sexual abuse, and physical abuse. And so when we think about coming out as a concept or as an idea, right? Or expressing oneself fully, we need to go into that with the understanding that like some of these places might be safe and some of these places might not be safe. And then when you add on those other layers of identity, such as race and ethnicity, disability, religion, et cetera, these things get complicated. We often hear about microaggressions in terms of racism and racial microaggressions, but microaggressions can also happen around sex and gender, and sexuality. So some of the common microaggressions that our community gets is, how do you know you're this way if you've never tried ... People asking really personal questions like, what do you have in your pants? How do you have sex? Telling young people especially that they're just confused or you're too young to know what you want. That is some adultism hardcore. That's like adultism and heterosexism compounded, right? Especially for young folks. Like, we never want to tell them that they're confused or it's just a phase or you're too young to know who you are and what you want. Like, no, they are in charge of who they are and what they want, and they get to decide that for themselves. There are so many other microaggressions that I could have listed here. This is just some basic starters that we get all the time. Asking trans folks if they've had any operations or if they plan to, about, asking anything about their genitalia and surgery or transition or anything like that is just, it's not okay unless you have a relationship with that person and they initiate that conversation. Or you can ask for consent, right? You can say like, hey, I would like to hear about your transition, or whether or not you're thinking about transitioning. Would you be open to talking about that with me, right? You give them the option, don't just demand it. Also, asking for people's coming out stories, really not okay. Once again, those stories could be filled with trauma, and we don't want to just bring up trauma and demand trauma, stories from folks. So we start to see these negative health outcomes, these disparities, specifically for queer and trans youth, these high-risk situations or environments: houselessness, drug abuse, survival sex, things, STIs, STDs, human trafficking, suicide, dropping out of school. These are all those stats and things, and I'm just going to skip over a lot of this because it's just a lot of data, and we're going to send this to you after the end of this presentation. But things to note is that, suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people, and it's 300% more likely for LGBTQIA folks. Not just thinking about it, and then 500% more likely for youth to attempt it at least once in their life. And I am one of those people. 40% or more of homeless youth identify as LGBTQIA+. We see that very tightly linked with domestic violence, child abuse, and coming out or being outed. We see higher rates or disproportionate rates of LGBTQ folks in the foster care system. Some notes on youth of color, right? When we see those compounding identities, compounding oppressions, and compounding marginalizations, youth of color, queer and trans youth of color, experience even higher rates of these things. All right, so moving into our environmental assessment and being allies, being advocates. What can we do to help prevent these disparate outcomes? It's always important to start where you are. Start with yourself, start with your family, start with your organization, and do a scan. How gendered is your organization? So I want us to think about how and where does gender show up in your space and why? If you work with young people, specifically in school settings, when we have kids line up in boys and girls lines, right? Or if we have certain toys that are for boys and certain toys that are for girls, or certain sports, youth sports that are boys this and girls that, right? How are we reinforcing these gender norms and expectations and divisions, right? And why? Why are we separating things or segregating things into a binary gender system when there's really no need for it, right? Especially for young folks, because their bodies are maturing and growing at different rates and things like that. Things like participating in youth sports. A middle school girl who's playing basketball is pretty much going to be at the same level physiologically as a middle school boy who's playing basketball, right? It's not until like late in puberty or adulthood that we start to see bodily differences in terms of, athletics, strength, fitness, height, that kind of stuff. And even then, I am a former athlete and I have played sports with women who were stronger, fitter, faster, and taller than many of the men that I knew and grew up with. And vice versa. I've played sports with I've played co-ed sports, and when you play co-ed sports, you just learn to use your body and your skills and talents in different ways. So, we need to start thinking about like, what is the purpose of this gender segregation? Why are we allowing it? And how can we actually liberate these young folks and help them develop into, young, confident, strong, healthy people by eliminating these unnecessary gender divisions, right? Think about how and where sexual orientation shows up in your space. Whether that's a chat with your colleague about their relationships and their partnerships and that kind of stuff, or if you insinuate that two kids in your program have a crush on each other or like each other, we don't know what their sexual orientation is. We don't know if they actually like each other. And why do we only assume that for heterosexual kids, right? Why don't we assume that maybe little Johnny has a crush on little Billy, right? So those are things to think about. Other things to think about are what do your forms and surveys include, or are they exclusionary? So if you think about registration forms or billing invoices or things like that, do they say mother and father, or do they say parent 1, parent 2, or even parent 3 and 4, right? Are the children listed as boy and girl, or are they listed as children or youth participant? How are we addressing people? Do our forms and stuff even give us the option to put down demographic data or information around our gender, right? Do we only include male and female options, or do we add non-binary and transgender options, or are we really radical and just put a fill in the blank and ask people to use the words and language and terminology that they choose to use for themselves? And then we do the hard work on the back end of putting that into nice, neat categories for our grant reports. And then think about your policies, procedures, dress codes, etc. What do these things say about how you value LGBTQIA+ lives and expression? Specifically with dress codes, we see very strong gender segregation and penalization for wearing certain types of things. I can tell you as a young queer non-binary professional that job interviews are one of the most nerve-wracking, anxiety-inducing times in my life, because I have to figure out, what gender do I need to present? What signals do I need to present and send to this possible employer to get them to hire me, right? to let them know that I fit into their culture and that I'm one of them and that I can be part of their culture and community. And then once I get in there, then I can be myself, maybe. Right? But like, what does that say when I show up to work and I dress in a way that doesn't align with somebody else's expectation of who I should be or how I should express myself? Right? If a male staff member showed up in a skirt or a dress, how would they be treated? Would they be disciplined? Would they be ridiculed? Right? Things that we need to think about. Policies and procedures also in terms of hiring, firing, paid time off. Oftentimes, family leave policies are very exclusionary to LGBTQ folks because they narrowly define family as like your legal married family. And up until 2015, we didn't have marriage equality. So, you know, my ex-father-in-law committed suicide a few years ago, and I could not take time off from work under the Family Medical Leave Act or whatever because he wasn't family, even though he had been my father or father-in-law for many years. So, you know, those are the things that we need to take a look at and think about and analyze, right? So in the chat box, you know, as you're going through this list of questions and evaluating your spaces and organizations, share with us what are some of those things that you are thinking about now. What are those places where you think that you could make an immediate change in making your space more affirming and inclusive of queer and trans folks? Maybe it's as simple as changing the signs on your bathrooms so that all bathrooms are designated by the different type of toilet or stall or urinal that's in there rather than the gender of the person that is entering those doors. What do you all think? Feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat box. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Kay. At our church, changing mother and father to parent one and parent two. Yeah, that can be huge. Yeah, Maria, working on being more inclusive with all of our materials, for sure. If you have magazines sitting in a lobby or a waiting room, make sure you have magazines that are for the queer and trans community, right? Make sure a diversity of lives and relationships and people are represented in your space. Other folks? Anyone else feel comfortable sharing how gender might show up in your space? Guardian 1 and Guardian 2, cool. Thank you for sharing, Kay. Cool, thank you for sharing, Shannon. Awesome. All right, advocacy and euphoria. So this is the quick and dirty of how to effectively serve LGBTQIA plus folks, specifically youth, but folks in general. Always, first and foremost, assess your own level of knowledge and potential biases. Just like the work that we all are doing to unlearn racism and white supremacy, we need to be doing the same unlearning around gender stereotypes and assumptions and social norms around sex, gender, and sexuality. We need to work to learn more and overcome our personal barriers. Assess your agencies, forms, policies, and procedures. Make changes to break down barriers. Embrace the concept of both and inclusion and safe separation. So I saw something in the chat about changing the name of a group from Girls Speak to Youth Speak, which obviously takes it from a very gendered place to a very inclusive and expansive place. But I also want us while embracing that concept of both and, we need to understand that, especially for marginalized communities or oppressed groups, that it is important to have a safe, separate space for those folks to be with one another, to talk with one another, to build their self-confidence and that kind of thing, right? So at LYG, you know, we serve LGBTQIA plus folks, right? We're serving a marginalized population, but we're also expanding our programming to create programming specifically for queer and trans youth of color, because that experience of being queer or trans and a person of color with those multiple marginalized identities is very unique from the experience of our white or white passing queer and trans folks in our general programming, right? So think about that idea of both and. We need both this separate, supportive, affirming space, but we also need inclusion, right? Simultaneously. Use gender inclusive language for all clients. Do not assume anyone's identity. We talked about that. Listen, 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 listen. Ask questions for clarity if you don't understand a term or a phrase or a way that somebody is referring to themselves or about their relationships, and then act once you have more information and understanding. Always advocate for LGBTQI folks, clients, with staff, other service providers, parents, etc. Create affirming spaces and practices. Acknowledge that queer identities and relationships are valid. They exist. We are historic. We are viable and desirable, just as viable and desirable as it is to be cisgender or heterosexual. In fact, queer sex is really awesome. So just throwing that out there, that it is viable and desirable. And our relationships are often more equitable. Demonstrate your commitment to affirming and including different identities and orientations, right? Don't just say you're an ally, but actually do the work to make space inclusive and affirming. Stand up, push back, challenge stereotypes, prejudices, and discrimination at all social levels. In your families, at your schools, in the workplace, in your faith institutions, all of these things. When you hear a gender stereotype, that's a moment for you to be an ally and to push back and say, actually, that's a stereotype, and it's really limiting to people. And humanity is way more expansive than that little joke or stereotype that you just made. When it comes to staff interactions, right, think about the way that you talk with your staff members, and think about the ways that that could potentially make them feel invalidated, overlooked, uncomfortable, or unsafe in their work environment. It's important for you to listen and respect other people's requests, especially regarding their name and their pronouns and their identity. Confront your internal biases when that stuff comes up. I love this last line. If someone's identity is doing no harm to anyone or anything, then it is not your place to criticize or speak on their identity. Youth and staff interactions, right? This is how we make sure our youth feel supported and cared for at our centers. Listen, listen, listen. Don't pry, and just affirm them and validate them and let them know that humanity is vast and there are so many different ways of being a human being. There are so many different ways of being a boy or being a girl or being non-binary, and all of them are valid. When it comes to observing youth interactions, these experiences can vary widely and are very unique depending upon the people involved. And as a staff member or adult working with youth, we have to be prepared to address prejudice and stereotyping and discrimination between our youth. We have to address relationships outside of heteronormative standards, pronouns, gender usage, bathroom usage, etc. As the adults, we have to help guide the way, right? But also the kids are all right. So let them lead you. Let them be your mentor. Let them be your guide as well. Ultimately, it's your duty to ensure their safety and emotional well-being. And you can't do that if you are reinforcing those stereotypes and divisions. Also, do not fall into the trap of using respectability to cover an act of prejudice. And that goes not just for LGBTQ folks, but for acts of racism as well. All right, in the time that we have left, I want to open it up for questions that you might have. And I do want to say, kind of going back to these interactions, the one form of interaction I forgot to create a slide for was staff and parent interactions and how we might advocate for youth with their parents, if that youth is out or thinking of coming out and those kinds of things. And so a couple of things I just want to share is that when it comes to parent interactions, it's important to give grace, but advocate for those young folks, right? Oftentimes, parents will call me or email me and have concerns about their kid being exposed to certain kinds of people and that kind of stuff. And so it's important to recognize the positives in that parenting moment. Like, I hear that you are really concerned about your young person, right? I hear that you care about your child so much and you love them so much. However, and then counteract that belief or value, and guide them towards a more affirming approach. And then you can always send them my way if they need more help in education. All right, so with that, we have about 15 minutes left. So I would love to hear from you all. What are some questions that you have? I'll stop sharing my screen. What are some questions that you have? Anything I didn't touch on or you need more fully described or thought about?
Hey, I have a, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my camera doesn't work.
Okay.
You touched on the fact that I'm familiar with Louisville Youth Group. I worked for Metro Office of Youth Development 100,000 years ago in PCC, and you guys were one of the first groups that I had come in and speak to my Shepherd Square Smoketown youth. One of the things you touched on was that Louisville Youth Group is, you have the separate, I guess you all are creating a separate space for you to talk specifically with minority youth. I want to know, because I'm gonna make this statement and some may agree, some may not.
Yeah.
These are conversations we don't have in the African American community, which is why a lot of our youth are experiencing the things that they're experiencing. Okay.
Yeah.
That was one of the reasons I had Louisville Youth Group come and speak with my youth in Shepherd Square.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very helpful. How can I connect with you all to send African American youth to your program? Because these are not conversations that we have in our community.
Yeah.
They need to be had. I think that one of the reasons it's not had is because a lot of people don't know how to have them. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, true.
But definitely need to be had. I'm a member of the the gay community myself, and we're losing a lot of kids to a lot of things because the conversations are not being had. Yeah. I'm also a teacher, so there are some things that I feel comfortable speaking on and some things that I don't. I'd rather connect with Louisville Youth Group and work with you all in terms of when students come to me with issues, I have somewhere to send them.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Well, I know it makes sense. How do we, is there something you can send me, I guess through my email or something like that, to help me get those youth to you?
Yeah. So we just hired a program coordinator for our Cutie BIPOC, which stands for Queer, Trans, Black, Indigenous, and Other Folks of Color, our Cutie BIPOC programs. So we don't have those youth groups started yet, but we are hoping to get those things. We're doing a lot of like evaluation of potential barriers and things within our organization. But we are starting like a queer, a melanin like queer and trans support group for youth of color through our counseling relationship. So there will be like anyways, the best way to get a hold of me for all of this really is to email me. And I've dropped my email address and phone number in the chat box. And I would love to collaborate with you all. Like, we are looking for, in order to launch these programs, we are looking for space. We currently meet at the First Lutheran Church down on East Broadway, but that space is not ADA accessible, and youth would have to find transportation to downtown, which isn't always accessible. So we are looking for spaces primarily in the West End to hold our youth programs. And so, you know, and we are open to hosting support groups and things like that at your centers and at your institutions so that we can start building those relationships and building up this programming and providing direct and immediate support to your young folks.
Okay, I have a math academy that's been built out in the Shadley area in Southland Terrace. And so I'm willing to open my space.
Yeah.
For, you know, for you guys to come in and meet if need be. It's still in build out mode, but
yeah, let's do it.
Something I'm interested in doing. And that's the Shadley area, but you know,
I mean, that's great. That's great,
bus line. Okay, I'm done.
I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to your email. Other folks, other questions, things I can help you all with?
I would love to hear some about your experience. I teach with the Kentucky Arts Council as a teaching artist, which means I go out, you know, to all of the counties. And of course, there are queer, trans, non-binary kids in every group that I work with. I'm in some situations where it is safe for me to introduce myself with my pronouns, and other situations where it's not.
Yep.
And I would love to hear your experience with situations where you're trying to support youth in the room while also being able to maintain your ongoing presence in the room, and how you navigate that. That's a simple question, right?
Oh, super easy, Shannon. Yeah, so as an openly queer educator, this is one of those things that I have to navigate all the time. And I have, just so you know, I've been kicked out of schools for being an openly queer educator, for affirming queer and trans folk in my classroom, and for using my pronouns and being out about who I am with my students. And so for even just talking about gender with students in some schools, like schools that have openly transgender students and queer students, but I come in as a guest speaker and I broach the subject and I'm kicked out because of one angry parent, right? Something like that. And so I think, you know, it is so important. It is so important for youth to see adults that reflect who they are, whether, you know, to have teachers and educators and people giving them life experiences and exposure to things that look like them, that sound like them, that have a shared lived experience or identity. And so it is a delicate balance of choosing, you know, when do I be fully out and proud and when do I not? And sometimes it's a balancing act of, maybe I don't present and say these things at first, but if I'm going to be spending a lot of time with these kids, maybe I release this information in bits and pieces and slowly, so that they've developed a rapport with me first and they think I'm awesome. And then they find out that I'm queer, right? And now their little brains are thinking, like, they're putting the two things together, right? I honestly, like, the best advice I can give you is just to say, like, always, like, it's a personal decision, always, right? You have to evaluate your own safety in those spaces, and whatever you decide is most safe for you is valid, and that's okay. It's important that if you are going to be an openly queer educator or teacher or something in some way, that your organization has your back. Because I've taught at really, really conservative Catholic schools, and they tried to kick me out because I was openly queer, and my manager had my back and really advocated for me to be there in the classroom, right? Maybe tone it down in certain ways, but like, so that I'm still a presence for those. I'm still a visibly queer person for those kids, right? And then, like, you know, if a school that you're going into or an organization that you're going into decides to kick you out of that space for being open about who you are and that kind of stuff, like, that's on them, and we can't control that, right? So we can do our best to like silently signal or not so silently signal, and to be open and affirming about ourselves, but also to support and advocate for the youth in the room, right? Every school I go into, I have youth come out to me afterwards, and it's the first time that they might have expressed that to an adult in their life, right? And so you can be that person for them if you are open. But it's so complicated. And I would, if you haven't heard of GLSEN, the Gay Lesbian Straight Education Network, I highly recommend getting in touch with them or going to their website for more information on you know, being an educator, a queer educator, and you know, how to handle that. May the force be with you.
I just wanted to say quickly, I'm taking over for Antonio and closing this out. I did put a survey in the chat. If everyone could please fill that out for the BLOCS community. I assume this is my first time doing this, so I apologize if that's not what it's for, but I believe that all these trainings are under BLOCS. So if you guys could go in and fill that out, and we do have about 5 more minutes. Antonio did want to let you all know that you all will be receiving this recording on Monday or Friday. And thanks everybody for coming in. You have a little more time I just wanted to, I'll turn it back over to you, but I wanted to get that in before 12 o'clock.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the folks that are dropping stuff in the chat box. You are welcome to share my information with whoever you want. If you want to bring more training like this to your specific organization or community or faith institution or something like that. As a nonprofit, like most of you all, LYG, doing trainings like this is one of the only income fee-for-service type of things that we do, and we do that on a sliding scale, equitable way for, you know, small to large nonprofits and that kind of stuff. So we are always open to doing presentations, to helping folks, to provide technical assistance around policies and procedures and that kind of stuff. So yeah, share my information widely. And yes, I can do educational seminars in Southern Indiana as well. So part of the LYG service area is actually Southern Indiana, because the next closest youth support group for queer and trans youth is in Indianapolis, and they just don't come down south. So any other questions, any other things I can help answer for folks before we end for the day?
This is Eva. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I work for Catholic Charities in the Migration and Refugee Services Department. And I'm specifically looking for resources for Latinx folks, Spanish speaking folks, just pretty much anyone from a country south of the border that's looking for services from us.
Yeah.
We've gotten, like, I know we've had at least one unaccompanied minor who we've had as a client who was trans, and we don't actually work with those students, or clients, children, but we work with the people who are sponsoring them. So I'm wondering if you guys know of any, like, either online or in-person support, or just support groups for Spanish speaking queer youth. I wasn't really able to find much. I just found one website, which I can drop in the chat, that has like a lot of texts, like welcoming your trans family member, which seems more like support for the family. that's translated to Spanish. So if anybody has anything like that.
I would say locally there's not really a lot. One of the things that we are hoping to achieve with LYG is to develop that programming. We're just not there yet. A couple of our adult mentors are Spanish speaking folks. I can definitely look into more resources though. And so, once this session is over, we will send you the presentation. And I will come up with some other resources that I would like to share with you all as well. So I will make sure to add that to my list of resources. So just kind of, keep a lookout for all that stuff. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And really there's not a lot of
Yeah, that's what it
and
seems
specific, like Latinx specific stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you.
Eva, is that your email on the chat?
It should be.
No, well, I work for an organization. It's called sorry, my head totally was blank. It's Adelante Hispanic Achievers, and we work with a lot of the Latinx community. So if you'd like, I can go ahead and email you a little bit about us.
Oh yeah, I would. I think I know about Adelante, but I haven't had communicated with you guys. So here, I'll just write both my emails that would work in the chat.
I'll save that, and I will email you and tell you a little bit about ours.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to be connected too. Because I'm new here, y'all. I'm new here. Y'all, I need you to give me a tour, show me around. Awesome. Well, it's 11:59. My email address and phone number are in the chat. So feel free to reach out to me anytime if you just want to talk, if you have specific situations that you're dealing with, need resources, etc. Like LYG's, I'm open, LYG is open, and we're here to help.
All right. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Em, for a wonderful presentation.
Cool. Have a great day, people.
Thank you.